Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime. I'm your host, as always, Professor Prime. So, 25 years of Dragon Ball. 25 years of Dragon Ball. It's been a journey, my friends. It's been a journey. And I'm going to share my experience with you. If you been around my channel for a while, you know that I've talked about Dragon Ball quite a bit. I've had a lot of Math and Dragon Ball videos, and that's been an absolute blast because I like combining my passions. But I'm going to tell you where I started with Dragon Ball and just how that's been for me over the years. So I actually started with Dragon Ball Z, which is not uncommon for a lot of people. There was a push to bring Dragon Ball here, like I think back in the '90s, and that didn't work. But several years later, they tried Dragon Ball Z, and that worked. But I should point out that like I watched Dragon Ball Z on regular TV, and while I'm sure there was a push there, the Tanami stuff is what really pushed Dragon Ball Z over the edge in the West. But we'll get to that. So we're in the late '90s. You got a 10-year-old Prime, and I watched my Saturday cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons, and I got up early, and so Dragon Ball Z was on. I think it was like I want to say 7 o'clock or something like that. In any case, I started off with well the first episode of Dragon Ball Z, um, and then kind of went from there. And right off the bat, it pulled me in. Right, there was a lot of action, a lot of craziness. Um, and it was interesting to see like the story progress. So like I said, I watched it on regular TV at first, and then like later it would come to Tanami. And because when you watch it on regular TV, right, it got to a certain point, um, and then it just stopped, right? I think if I'm not mistaken, it got up to the point with Raccoon, and then it just stopped. Also, as we're going on, I'll try to keep the spoiler to a minimum, but you're free to assume that there will be some, just because I don't want to hold myself back. Anyway, um, when it got to Tsunami, it would be like that for a while, right? Like, so there was a point where me and so many other people watched the same thing over and over again just because it was that awesome. Then eventually they would bring over new episodes, right? And there were some changes with Funimation who were doubling that, where they switched to doing more in house because there was like, was it the Ocean Group is what they did with the originals? Um, and then they switched some things over. So some things were slightly different, but back then we were just like, hey, yeah, we're going with it. In any case, the Tsunami stuff pushed it over the edge, and instead of just watching it once a week, it was like every day. And I was also introduced to the Dragon Ball Z movies through Tsunami, right? And so, in any case, there was a lot of Dragon Ball Z for a long time. So from like 10 to 15, we were given a lot of Dragon Ball Z regularly, and yeah, some things were repeats. So there's a lot of segments of Dragon Ball Z that I know really well because I've seen it a bunch of times. In any case, it was such a huge show. It was such a big part of my formative years. It's like, oh, elementary school, middle school, high school, and at the time that we were in the Buu Saga and finishing things up, they brought Dragon Ball to Toonami. So I was watching Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball at the same time. And, so watch that out on Toonami, and eventually they brought GT, but that's a whole nother story, and we'll get there. In any case, back to Dragon Ball Z. It was this show that was action packed, that had these interesting characters, that was telling this interesting story. Um, and it just, it impacted me in a lot of different ways, but one of the biggest ways is it has impacted my exercise because I would run around as a kid, sure, but I didn't know that much about training and stuff like that. But in Dragon Ball Z, that's what they did, fighting these like crazy, like world-ending threats in training, but also just training for fun, especially with the Saiyans. And yes, I know some people say Saiyans and not Saiyans, and I'd argue that okay, that's fine by me. I prefer Saiyan, and if we really want to get into it, Saiyajin would be, probably the most correct way to go with that. And by that I mean it's the correct way to go with that if we're going to be sticklers, but we don't have to be. So I wanted to put it out there. It's like yes, I know some people say Saiyan. Some people say Saiyajin. I'm saying because that's how I grew up on it. Which there was a couple things that were like mispronounced with the older dub. Also, one of the things like they didn't say like deaf, at least for that first segment, like where it was the Ocean Dub voice cast. They were like sent to another dimension, which was confusing at first because I'm like I'm pretty sure that character died. But anyway, back to the training. I digressed. Back to the training. Um, I didn't know that much about it back then, but I see these characters either, training for these life changing, life destroying events or training because they just wanted to be better and they're stuck with me and I wanted to train. And so I started training. And so it's like I went from, yeah, just being an active kid to also training. And jump ahead, you know, it's 20. I still got into Dragon Ball um, when I was 10, so that's 25 years ago. For the training part, that really hit me when I was 13, when they were doing, sorry, you all might not have been there, so you don't remember, but at that time, when they were running Dragon Ball Z on the air, they were in the Cell Saga, so there was a lot of training in the anime version of that. Um, so it was great. It was really, really great. And that got me hyped up and that made me start training. And you jump ahead, it's 22 years later. And, I'm still going at it when I can. Some things have changed over time. So I do have to make adjustments here and there. But I train regularly. And Dragon Ball Z was a huge inspiration for that. It made it seem fun. It made it seem like the most epic thing ever because it is. Um, but yeah, so that's a huge part of my life in that way, and also just like I enjoyed a lot of themes, and it's like I was already into anime before I knew it was anime, and I feel like with Dragon Ball Z has cemented that and made me branch out even further after that. All that being said, yeah, so it was quite the experience growing up with it because I watched it at first on Saturday mornings, and then watched it regularly in the evenings with Tanami, and there's a weird segment where they did the Goddard Junior Saga, but they did that on Saturday morning, so I watched it back on Saturday mornings again, and I watched the movies there. I watched Dragon Ball there. Um, and so, it's just like from late elementary school in through high school and through high school and even to college, there was a lot of Dragon Ball because like around the time I got into college, Dragon Ball GT started, which um, mhm, I am not the biggest fan of GT. It's one of those things where like I don't think it's super bad like some people think it is, although I get why they say that, or at least like I don't think it's super bad just because it's lacking in a lot of quality. I think it's like bad in a sense because it's mediocre. So it's like it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's just like there's a lot of points where it bored me. But I still watched it religiously. I got through it. I wanted to see it. And I will also say there was a lot of good parts of it. Yeah. So that was like when I was in college, right? So it's like I watched Dragon Ball Z, elementary school and in middle school and in high school and Dragon Ball in high school, Dragon Ball GT in college. I got the old orange brick versions of Dragon Ball Z on DVD. Back when I was in college, rewatched that like fully uncut and all that. And also in college, like before I got those DVDs and while GT was on, Adult Swim, I think it was like during Adult Swim or either that or right before it, um, they had Dragon Ball Z Uncut, and I was like, "What Uncut?" Because here's the thing: Dragon Ball Z is a very violent show. Dragon Ball overall is quite violent. I do not deny that. But despite that, like right, growing up, I didn't know it was like super censored, right? Like they cut out like a lot of blood and stuff like that, and losing limbs and whatnot. But here's the thing. It was still pretty violent to the point where censorship was a joke. So to know that there was an uncovers, and I was still like, what? And yeah, it gets more brutal. But anyway, so in college, that's where I was at in terms of getting exposed to the material. And here's the thing: while that was all going on, while I'm going through all this Dragon Ball Z stuff, and Dragon Ball stuff and GT. I played the games. The first Dragon Ball game, um, I'm trying to remember because it was one or two of the ones that I'm going to mention. Like, I think the first one I might have gotten was Ultimate Battle 22 for the PlayStation. So while I'm watching all this Dragon Ball, while I'm getting more immersed in the franchise, and seeing more about what the manga is about and how that stacks up, um, there was different Dragon Ball games. And you know what? No, it wasn't that. Okay, so here's the thing. Ultimate Battle 22 I got, and that was my first PlayStation Dragon Ball Z game, and probably my only one, but it wasn't my first Dragon Ball game. My first one was actually probably weirdly online. It was a Flash Dragon Ball game. I forgot what it was called, but it was a Dragon Ball Z game, and it was a Flash game. It was a Flash fighting game, and it was pretty fun. It was like during the old days, before we even had like wireless internet. So I'm pretty sure that was actually my first Dragon Ball Z game. And this was still not followed by Ultimate Battle 22, because I think that was actually my third game. There's another game, and I've done a video on it. Is like Dragon Ball Z, Legendary Super Warriors. And while you do see card games be part of more Dragon Ball games over time, in the case of it appearing in Xenoverse, in the case that Dragon Ball like heroes exist, um, while you see that more be a thing these days, the first time I ever saw that was in Dragon Ball Z Legendary Super Warriors. Right? It's a turn-based card game slash fighting game about the Dragon Ball Z story, right? And it was really cool. And there was also some interactive elements because like there was different like you had the card, sure, but there was like a basic attack that you could do and you had to do inputs on. So it was an interesting game, and the music was dope. It was awesome. So anyway, Dragon Ball Z games. I've played a lot of them during that time of just being like where I was starting to get exposed to Dragon Ball, and it became more of a regular thing. So I had those first three games that I mentioned, but then over time I got even more. The first one I got on like PlayStation 2 was Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. It's my favorite Dragon Ball game, period. And one of my favorite games, like just overall. Such a fun game. And there's some fighting games where I'm like, I'm all right with. With Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3, I'm a beast. No one is going to see me in that game. Um, yeah, so I was like super into Dragon Ball growing up, and gaming being one of my big things, it's not a shock that I played a lot of Dragon Ball Z games. So like after Budokai 3, I did try Budokai Tenkaichi 1, 2, and 3. Um, and they were all right. I'd say like if you were going to get any of those, because it's just like right, it's the same story. Because that's a lot of Dragon Ball games, or like just Dragon Ball Z games, really, and they're repeating a story. And even in games like Xenoverse and Xenoverse 2, they largely still rely on the Z portion of the story, even though we have so much Dragon Ball at this point. Anyway, so I played those games, right? And then there was like the PS2 era where, it's like there's Burst Limit and Raging Blast and eventually like Xenoverse, which I got to play all those, and Xenoverse 2 as well, and eventually Dragon Ball Z Kakarot for PS4, among other Dragon Ball games, because there's been a lot, and I've gotten a lot. Even though, again, a lot of Dragon Ball games are Dragon Ball Z games, and a lot of them will focus on the same story. So I'm very well versed in the Z section of the Dragon Ball story. All that being said, so over time, right, I am playing all these games. I'm, watching everything. I'm reading more about Dragon Ball, and like I said, getting into more like the manga and differences and stuff like that. Um, and so it was fun. And in college, it's like, it didn't really go away. And so what gets interesting is like, I think there's this idea that it's like, oh, there's new Dragon Ball content for a while. And like, you have the Renaissance kicked off by, Battle of Gods. And we'll get to that. But it's like the truth is, it didn't really slow down though. It's just like there wasn't like new stuff, right? Because there was a constant output of games, and then like I think back in 2008 is when it came out. There was the Dragon Ball anniversary special, or the Dragon Ball Z anniversary special. Um, and it was like Son Goku and his friends. I don't know if you all seen that. It's a weird movie or weird special, whatever you want to call it. And introduced Vegeta's like brother, which they bring up later on. In any case, like so there was that, and then Dragon Ball Kai came out, and Dragon Ball Evolution came out. That was a thing that happened. Oh, it was a thing that happened. Note, I did watch that movie. No, I did not pay to see it. Because why would I do that to myself? But I did watch it eventually out of curiosity. I wanted to see how bad it was because it looked awful. Oh my god, and it was the worst. And I don't say that lightly. But anyway, it still was Dragon Ball content that was coming out. And so, for years, Dragon Ball Kai was coming out. So it never really slowed to a halt, right? But then 2013 happened, though, right? And at this point, Dragon Ball had been in my life for quite some time, and there had been so much content that came out of it. But I don't think anyone saw like that coming, right? Because like I said, I watched the shows, I watched the movies, played the games, all that good stuff. Read a lot about it. Took that manga dive, um, and it's just like there's a lot of Dragon Ball. And then in 2013, Battle of Gods came out, and it was this new Dragon Ball Z movie, and I wanted to say that because it's like Battle of Gods and Resurrection F are both Dragon Ball Z movies, but they were included in Super. Um, but anyway, it came out and it was really cool. Beerus and Whis are great characters, and it was such a cool movie to see. And then you had like Super Saiyan God, which is it's a new form. It looks cool. And it's just like they added so much to the lore. And when the movie's ended, it's like, oh, there's multiple universes, and I don't feel like they've ever capitalized on that enough. But it was cool. And then years later, right, we get Resurrection F. And the thing about that is, plot wise, I mean, Frieza comes back, and I'm not a big Frieza fan, but they bring him back, and the movie is fun. I liked it, and like I know some people have issues with Super Saiyan Blue, but I like that form. In any case, so you had these two Dragon Ball Z movies, and you're like, okay, now what are they gonna do next, right? And again, I think they haven't capitalized on the multiverse stuff nearly enough. There was the Tournament of Power, there was the Universe 6 art, sure, but still, most of the things in the Super era or Universe 7 stuff. But anyway, so we had these two movies at the time. We didn't know what was coming next, and then bam, not long after the movie came out in Japan, and it's like it didn't even hit America yet. We get the news that Dragon Ball is coming back, right? There's gonna be a new Dragon Ball show, Dragon Ball Super. It's like what? And so yeah, that was a good year for Dragon Ball. And so like 2015 is also the year that I broke into academia. It's the year that I started teaching. It's the year that The Force Awakens kind of came out for Star Wars, and it's the year that Dragon Ball Super came back or started. Um, what was that sound? I don't know, but so at this point, right, like I'm almost 20 years into my Dragon Ball journey, and there's still like so much new content. And it's just like it's been interesting because like I've watched a lot of anime over the years, and like while most of the stuff I've had experience wise with Dragon Ball has been dubbed, I watched Super like the anime entirely subbed. I watched some repeats dubbed, but that one was subbed because I would go back and forth, right? Like I will watch sub or dub. I don't care. But it was a different experience for Dragon Ball for me, and it was good either way, right? Um, so Super, oof, Super starts, and I'm not sure how this is gonna go at first because it's like the first 30 episodes, or like around the first 30 episodes, are retellings of Battle of Gods and Resurrection F, and it's like, and for the record, with Battle of Gods, there's parts that they did better in the anime and parts that they did worse. And with Resurrection F, it's worse. So it's like I wasn't super excited about that, or like the really weird like Gel Vegeta arc that came after. But Universe 6 that made things interesting. Like, so I'm glad that I stuck with it. And then after that, you get the whole future arc, and you get like the Tournament of Power and all the stuff that led up to the Tournament of Power, and you get episode 90 of Dragon Ball Super, which is my favorite episode of Dragon Ball. Period. That was the one with Gohan versus Goku. It is the best. Um, in any case, I was so excited when Dragon Ball Super came back, and I was a little annoyed about the retellings of two movies that I had already seen. But I'm glad that I stuck with it because I really did enjoy Super. I know some people have some issues with it, and fair enough. But some of those issues are issues that already existed in Dragon Ball and in Dragon Ball Z, and definitely in GT. Um, so it's like some of those issues weren't new, and if they were gonna say like, okay, well, it's some of the same issues I'm saying over and over again, I get why they were annoyed with that, but it's like, don't act like this is new. This isn't day one. If you're a Dragon Ball fan, you know that some of these issues were already there. But anyway, Super was great, and we had around 3 years of Super being a thing, and then it cooled down, and eventually we got two movies that came out after that. So one was Dragon Ball Super Broly, which was way better than I expected, and I'm willing to bet that a lot of other people expected too. And it was just great. There was so much that they established like lore wise that I enjoyed, and the fighting was great. And then there was Dragon Ball Super Superhero, which I also enjoyed. It was great seeing the focus on Piccolo and Gohan. And Gohan is my favorite character, so it was nice to see him get some shine. Um, and it was nice. And for both of those movies, I definitely saw in theaters. I'm glad that was an option because like most of the Dragon Ball Z movies, I didn't get to see in theaters. Most of them it was just like DVD, right? Like there was a point where they brought Fusion Reborn out in certain theaters, so but I didn't get to see it, and we didn't get. If I'm mistaken, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we actually got a U.S. Theatrical release of Battle of Gods. If you got to see it somewhere, feel free to let me know. But I don't think that was a thing that happened. And with Resurrection F, um, we did have one, but it was in limited theaters, and so it wasn't anywhere near me. But with Broly and Superhero, I got to see those in theaters. That was awesome, and I wish Superhero got more marketing. So yeah, with Dragon Ball though, like I've been a huge fan of it for quite some time. I've enjoyed a lot of aspects of it. It has impacted my life. Like seriously, my training journey. I don't think it would have started when it did if not for Dragon Ball, and it certainly wouldn't have had the same sense of gravitas to it, right? Like, it made training fun. It made me want to try that, to learn more about it. And that has become such a big part of my life. I've always been active, but that training part, that wasn't until I was 13 when I got into that more, like strength training, conditioning my body, things like that. So I owe Dragon Ball Z for that, and Dragon Ball as a whole. I enjoy the characters. I enjoy the stories. I have enjoyed the games. And oh, with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, one of the cool things about that is like not only did I enjoy that game, but while I was playing it, before I did like a overall video like on Math and Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, I actually did like a bunch of shorts leading up to that, just because of how much fun I was having and how much math I was seeing. It was great. And while we're on the topic of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, what did they do with Tien in that game? They just made that dude seem so sad. Like, what'd you do to my boy? You made him so sad. Like, but yeah, so Dragon Ball is such a big franchise. Multi-billion franchise or multi-billion dollar franchise. It keeps on going. Um, and despite some perception on it, it never really stopped. But I will say it's been like getting crazy in this last decade. And at the time of recording is 2023. So Battle of Gods came out 10 years ago, which is insane to think about. But yeah, so I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say about this movie, or sorry, about Dragon Ball. Um, it's been a journey. It's been 25 years. And I'm a huge Dragon Ball fan. And like I said, if you've been around, you see that I've had a lot of, I was gonna say movies, a lot of videos. Um, So yeah, feel free to check them out and know that there's going to be more in the future. That being said, one thing that I do want to say before I close this out is that one of the things that I've talked about repeatedly on this channel when I talk about math and Dragon Ball is that I like that during the Saiyan saga, during the Frieza saga, we get familiar with the idea of power levels and or battle power, whatever you want to call them. We get used to that. And the idea is like at first it's just like, hey, well, it's a numerical representation of power, right? And then as we go on, it's not too far into that concept where it's like, well, hey, this could be subverted. This could be a subversive concept. And no matter how you cut it, the thing with power levels is like, right, it's about math, it's about stats, it's about data analysis. It's something that's getting conveyed to the reader or the watcher, but it's also something that the people in the universe use to navigate a situation, right? Because they're like, oh, well, this person is this powerful or that powerful, and so I'm going to do this or that or not do this or not do that. And that can be used against them because it's like, so I feel like with Dragon Ball Z, it gives such a powerful lesson about like, data analysis and stats. It's just like, so your tool might be saying this, and you might make information on this or that, or decisions based on that information, but there's more to the tale. Context is king, context is key. And I think that's really cool. And power levels were such an awesome thing that a lot of people still cling to that idea, right? And rightfully so, right? Like we're talking about power levels or power scaling, so many people um, are still attached to that concept. And I feel like that's because when we think about math in an academic sense, power levels and power scaling get at that same thing, right? We're trying to use math to say something about the universe, trying to make sense of things. And I think that's a really cool thing. So yeah, Dragon Ball and math, it's awesome combo. Anyway, yeah, 25 years of Dragon Ball. Here's the 25 more at least. I'll see you, and that's just for me in my life. But anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.